Hey, good evening, you guys. How are you today? Are you glad you're here tonight? I can't think of any place I would want to be more than here tonight to listen to our good teacher teaching us on archaeology. Have you enjoyed this seminar so far? I'm curious, how many of you have not missed a single night? Anybody? Oh, how many of you, this is your very first night? Anybody? Oh, we got a couple right here. Wonderful. Why don't you stand up? No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. So we do have bathrooms around the corner over there or where the restrooms are, but the fact that you're waving at people tells me you probably already, yeah. Well, my name's Tyler Long, and some of you know who I am, some of you do not. I'm the bald guy inside the brochure here with Tony Moore, and I've certainly enjoyed. I've listened to Tony for a number of years teach on history and archaeology and the Bible, and every time I listen to it, it just gets better and better and better. Now, this seminar not only focuses on archaeology, but this coming weekend, it's going to begin to make a transition to see how Bible prophecy feeds into Bible archaeology. And so on Thursday night, Tony's going to be talking about Babylon, and we're also going to go and look in the Bible to see what the book of Daniel has to say about Babylon in prophecy. In fact, when you leave here this evening, you will be handed a little card like this, and it says, World Events in Bible Prophecy. And so think of like this archaeology seminar as like an appetizer before a main dish. And then this prophecy series as it kicks off is going to be the main dish. And I'm going to be the presenter of that. I certainly don't know archaeology to the extent of Tony Moore, but I've had a chance to travel and do seminars on the Bible on 4 continents. I've been to all 50 states. And I had a chance to do some archaeological digging around in Israel and Jordan. And so I've had a chance to travel all over Europe and stuff. But when it comes to archaeology, I wanted to leave it to the professional. But again, my name is Tyler Long. And I want to open up tonight with a prayer. Would you please bow your heads with me? Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to just hear how the Bible comes alive, how the Bible record is true, and we can see that in history and in archaeology. Lord, I pray that you would be with our speaker, Tony Moore, tonight, and that you would just fill him with your Holy Spirit. That tonight would be just such a blessing, such an encouragement as we see history and archaeology come alive right before our eyes. Bless us tonight, we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And Tony Moore, my good friend, why don't you come on up and begin to share with us tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Well, good evening. How are you? You know what we call... I don't think I'm there. You know what we call today, and when I lived in Pittsburgh, a day like today? A Chamber of Commerce Day. It was so glorious this afternoon with that deep blue sky and seeing the mountain off in the distance and all of that. It was just glorious. We had kind of a lot of rainy days in Pittsburgh like you have here, or a lot of overcast days. And but we called it a Chamber of Commerce Day. Kind of love that, don't you? Anyway, it's so good to see you this evening. We have changed a little bit up here on the table to reflect things that we have from Jerusalem. Tonight we're going to talk about Jerusalem. There's a 3,000-year Israeli history there, but it's over 4,000 years old, the city of Jerusalem. So we'll have things up here on the table. We'll have some nice coins, if you haven't been up to see, coins that kind of span that period of time. We have some axes up here, a nice Crusader axe here. We did DNA, no, we didn't do any DNA testing. But anyway, a nice Crusader axe from that period of time. We'll talk a little bit about the Crusades tonight, and some other things, and some Roman glass, and other things about Jerusalem. So if you haven't been up by the table, or if you have, you can still come up and take some pictures of those things. And then tomorrow night, we're going to talk about the footsteps of Jesus, and we'll have some new things on the life of Jesus, including an alabaster jar like Mary would have used with a nard. Pretty special. I have that in a very special place as I travel, because it's very, very dainty, and I do not want it to get broken at all. Anyway, we also have a shofar. I'll get Jeff. He brought the shofar. I'll have him play it. Here, why don't you play right now, Jeff? Give us a toot. So shofar is a horn, and here we have a horn from an ibex, I believe.
It may sound like the shofar player has already been wounded before the battle began. Ibex? It's like a goat, similar to, it's like a small deer. Absolutely. You get pretty loud. You get about 3 or 4 notes out of it.
I'll tell you a very funny thing. When you're in Jerusalem on Thursdays is Bar Mitzvah Day. Bar is son, mitzvah law, you become a son of the law, right? And so they go down to the Western Wall to do their Bar Mitzvah. By the way, how old was Jesus when he went back to the temple? He went to have his Bar Mitzvah. Okay? A little surprising, but yes. So anyway, they have a lot of these guys who are hired to play for the families that go down. They have these kind of shofars and so on, right? Well, if you're Orthodox, they do a bar mitzvah. If you're not Orthodox, but you can do a bat mitzvah, which means a daughter of the law. Very unacceptable for the Orthodox. Anyway, they often have these guys, and they're there to play kind of some traditional shofars and beat drums. And I had a group there one time on a Thursday, and I heard da-dun, 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 da-dun. I couldn't figure out why he was playing that on the saxophone, and then I saw, oh, it was a bat mitzvah. It was the whole family coming with their daughter down to a bat mitzvah. Anyway, it was very interesting as we go down on that particular day to see the things that happen. Well, tonight we're going to talk about the Jew, the Arab, in Jerusalem. I think, did I mention the other day, we have this oil lamp going. Now this is a replica of an oil lamp. Looks like it's wanting to be trimmed a little bit. I hope I don't accidentally put it out. But this oil lamp is burning olive oil. You have to trim your lamps every now and then. And I'm afraid I'm going to do my lamp end. I think I did my lamp end. So we'll just kind of pull it out and put a little bit of fire. Fortunately, I'm not having to rub sticks or do flint. But anyway, it's olive oil. And Gethsemane is very interesting. The Garden of Gethsemane is actually the garden of oil press. Gethsemane means oil press. And here are some old olive trees in Jerusalem. It happens to be at the Latin Church of All Nations. And these are very, very old olive trees. They don't go to the time of Jesus, but the roots would have gone to the time of Jesus. And so here we see these things on archaeological sites all the time. Kind of looks like a grist mill. It's actually an olive press. And you wonder, well, how would that work? You see them in all the different archaeological sites. They'll have them all through Galilee especially. But in Nazareth, there's a place called the Nazareth Village. They actually restored working village from that period of time. So here you can actually see one of the like grist mills and then the race, and you can see the pivot point in the middle, and then the axle, and you'd actually turn that around and crush the olives, right? And now I went to a very interesting place in Bethlehem during the olive crush, and they actually had a mechanism running it. Well, actually, this is from the Nazareth Village as well. That's me at the Nazareth Village. You can see the crushed olives. And in Old Testament times, they would actually put them into baskets like that, the crushed olives, put a stone on it, and they'd have kind of a wooden beam, and they would squeeze it by having a weight on it. The first weight, the first pressing would be for the Lord. Second stone would be for food. Third stone would be for light. Fourth stone, not much left. They'd use that for ointment or for soap. Okay. Now in Nazareth Village, they've actually had a commercial press that they had restored. So here you can kind of see the commercial press and the big stones. And this was a press that they had in Bethlehem. The local people, the family would go out and pick all the olives, and then the men and their sons would bring the olives to the commercial press, and they would be crushing them, and then they're putting them in baskets. And they don't use the stones anymore. They use hydraulics to squeeze them. And look at the pure joy on these guys as they're working. They're the workers there. Just so happy to do the olives. And life is about olives and olive oil and doing these kinds of wonderful things. And then you can kind of see the oil oozing out of the baskets through the pores of the basket. You see that? Now you might remember Jesus had the weight of the sins of the world on him. And what did he do? He sweat great drops. His sweat was like great drops of blood. And it almost looks like blood as it oozes out because he's in the Gethsemane or in the oil press, if you please. So anyway, a very interesting little side note before we get into tonight's program. Tonight we've entitled it The Jew, the Arab, and Jerusalem. We probably should call it The Jew, the Christian, the Muslim, and Jerusalem. For Jerusalem is the city of the three great monotheistic religions. The city of Jerusalem has long been divided into four quarters. There's the Jewish quarter, the Arab quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarters, the four quarters of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has tremendous significance for nearly 4 billion people. Can you imagine? Over 50% of the world trace their spiritual roots to this city. Now, Israel cannot boast the ancient pyramids like Egypt that we talked about on Saturday night, or the Hanging Gardens of Babylon that we'll talk about on Thursday night, or the great Acropolis of Greece. But this land alone lays title to the claim, Holy Land. Holy Land. Sacred as a spiritual epicenter for the three monotheistic religions, Jerusalem draws religious pilgrims with an irresistible force to the city. Here you can kind of see the various groups that would come. The name means city of peace, but few places have been subject to more turmoil or bloodshed than this one. During its 4,000-year history, it's been besieged and conquered by the Israelites, by the Egyptians, by the Aramaeans, by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by the Persians, by the Greeks, by the Arabs, by the Seljuks, by the Crusaders, by the Mamelukes, by the Ottomans, by the British, the Jordanians, and finally, after 3,000 years, the Israelis have conquered it once again. This happens to be the gate, and you can see that's not mothballs at all, that's bullet holes. That's the Jewish gate where they fought the Jordanians in 1967. In addition to multiple conquests, the city was destroyed 3 times. Once by the Babylonians, and they kind of put this interesting guy out here tonight. I think he's got something to do with Babylon on the head there. But once by the Babylonians in 605, they came down. They didn't destroy the city in 605. They destroyed it in 586, including the temple. It was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, and then it was destroyed again, razed to the ground in AD 135 by the Romans a second time. As you approach the city for the first time, the walls loom large on the horizon. Inside the walls are the old city of Jerusalem. Now, coming from a relatively new land like America, we're not used to seeing walled cities with their gates. But these walls have been so important to Jerusalem throughout time. Today, in an age of mortar shells and aerial combat, we do not need them, but through Jerusalem's long and beleaguered history, they've been very critical to the city's defense. Now, one afternoon back in 1989, it was my second trip to Jerusalem. I had spoken with some Palestinian shepherds along the wall near the Jaffa Gate, and we had chatted as they were watching their sheep. I went across the Hinnom Valley over by the King David Hotel. I wish I was staying there, but I wasn't. I was staying at a little study center, a little study house kind of next to that. And I walked over and I had my 10-year-old son, and I heard, da-da-da-da! I had a colleague with me with his son, and he said, that sounds like firecrackers. And I said, no, it sounds like an Uzi, a machine gun. I said, you take the boys and go to the room. I'm going to go back and see what happened. I went back and discovered that the 4 gentlemen shepherds we were talking to, that a zealot, in this instance it was an Israeli zealot, had come by and emptied the clip into the 4 shepherds. 1 died, 3 were wounded. The next day, I went over and took this picture of the blood on the walls from what had happened the night before. There are 8 gates into Jerusalem, so let's look at these 8 gates. The Lion's Gate, or St. Stephen's Gate, is the only gate open to the east. You kind of see the lions embossed on it. And so this is the main gate for people going into the Dome of the Rock. They're kind of coming in through this gate. Here's Herod's Gate, also called the Flower Gate. It opens to the north. Here's the Damascus Gate, the main gate for Palestinians coming into the city, and also for the Jewish people coming from the Jewish area that is very close to Mea Sharim. You can see it's the main gate going into the city. By the way, these walls we're looking at here do not go back to King Herod or to King David. These walls go back to Suleiman the Magnificent. Now that wall is built on a wall that would have been there earlier, okay? But not at that point. Here's a very interesting gate. It was built for Kaiser Wilhelm. It's called the New Gate. He had his carriage and didn't want to have to walk up steps to go into Jerusalem. So they opened this gate so his carriage could go in on flat ground. And of course, this is the Jaffa Gate. It opens toward Jaffa or modern day Tel Aviv. It's the main gate that tourists will go into the city of Jerusalem. And of course, here's the Zion Gate, or the Jewish gate we looked at earlier. And so the Jewish people can drive their cars in through that gate. It's often very challenging to get through the gate because cars have a really difficult time making the turns. Here's the Dung Gate going to the Temple Mount. So historically what would happen, they would take the carcasses of the animals they had sacrificed out the Dung Gate and put them in a place called hell, called Gehenna, right? Valley of Hinnom, that's hell, right? And they would burn them down there. And so that's where you get the idea of a burning hell and things not being put out, if that makes sense. Now, I have to confess, I spent nearly over 2 years in Jerusalem, and I still get lost no matter what gate I go through. Those narrow cobbled streets that wind and twist through the markets, it's meat markets and spice markets and clothing markets, not to mention the ones selling goods for religious pilgrims and tourists. You walk through and you speak with the shopkeepers and they just beckon you to come in and sit down and have tea and talk with them. Now back in 1989, there was a lot of unrest going on. I had my 10-year-old son that I mentioned and a colleague and his 15-year-old son, and we encountered tear gas here at the Damascus Gate. So you can kind of see we're coming out the gate here. People are holding their nose, crying, their eyes watering, and so on. It's very, very different. How different it was from the time I was there 2 years earlier. I could sense the uneasy peace 2 years earlier. The underlying hostilities were ready to boil over, but they never came out. But this was different as the first intifada or uprising was underway. I returned in 2001 to do some filming, and the city was actually rocked by a bomb while I was there, and that was the beginning of the second intifada. So the city of peace has not lived up to its name. Jerusalem means city of peace, but it has not lived up to its name. Yet there's no other city that I'd rather go to or no other market than the souk of old Jerusalem. The color, the smells, the food, the shopkeeper who challenges you not to buy his goods, whether it's for carved olive wood from Bethlehem, inlaid boxes from Damascus, ancient coins unearthed in the digs, Bedouin garments, that soft hello, hello, hello can be heard beckoning you to come in and sit down and sip tea and have conversation, and none but the most iron-willed will leave without buying something. And baklava, you like baklava? Not made with walnuts in this part of the world, but with pistachios. And I can tell you, I've eaten many a kilo of them while I'm there. This guy had some kind of a pancake. It was during actually a Ramadan. And I bought a kilo of those and had to feed them to the birds. They weren't too good. But anyway, as you go in, I'm always amazed at all of the produce, the fruits, the vegetables. They always seem to be still, even in the wintertime, many of them coming up from Jericho down in that very, very warm valley that is so productive. I saw this lady on one of my trips. She was very interesting. Bedouin lady, she had a box of oranges on her head, a moving store. She kept a little scale in her blouse, and she was ready to set up and do business on a moment's notice. I also noticed that she had 2 prices, one for me and one for everyone else. And look at the spice market. Can you just imagine? Look how beautiful all the spices are. To go actually buy the spices by the gram or the ounce. And look at this. Do you have to design it that way? Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? It goes on your bread with some oil. Very, very, very wonderful. Now, I'm a vegetarian, and for some reason I always end up here. I don't know why. But I end up on the street where all the meat markets are, and the animals are just kind of hanging there on the racks. Very different than here. Then the city is also the Via Dolorosa, the 14 Stations of the Cross, the Way of Suffering. And they go and they end in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Within its walls is also the Western Wall. Some people call it the Wailing Wall. And let me just say why they call it the Wailing Wall. So we had a film trip in July. We did a series on the life of Jesus, 28 television programs, and we had 7 one-month film trips over a 4-year period, different times of the year. And one time was in July. We were down at the Temple Mount, and everybody was laying around. They weren't sitting on chairs. That's kind of odd. And then somebody would read something, and all of a sudden, ah! Somebody read something over there, ah! What in the world is going on? You know what they were reading? Lamentations by Jeremiah. It was the day that commemorated the destruction of the Jewish temple by the Babylonians and by the Romans, conveniently on the same day, so they don't have to do this twice. It's the only holy day or spiritual holy day that you can actually film down there, so we got a lot of interesting film that day. But that's why they were wailing. So when the Jewish people got kicked out of Jerusalem in 135 AD, the Christians really didn't let them come too much, but the Muslims would let them come one day a year. And what day would that be? Passover? Pentecost? No. They let them come on the day to commemorate the destruction of the temple. And what would they do? Ah! That's why it was called the Wailing Wall. Okay? So today we really don't call it the Wailing Wall, we call it the Western Wall, or the Holy Wall, right? And that's the holiest place for Jewish people to go. And so here we can kind of see the Dome of the Rock. We can see the Dome of the Rock, and it's on the Temple Mount. Now, the Dome of the Rock is not a Muslim mosque, it's a shrine, and it's on the place where the Jewish temple had once stood. And so with this background, I want to share with you the historical background of Jerusalem and why it is so important. Now, to understand that, we have to understand the spiritual father of Jerusalem. And nowhere is that easier than going down to Hebron, where I'm walking up to a great building over the Cave of Machpelah built by Herod the Great. This is the only building Herod ever built that is still standing. Okay? And so it's over the tombs of Abraham and Sarah. They call them today cenotaphs. So here we can see the cenotaph of Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, that's very interesting. Here's a cenotaph of Abraham, cenotaph of Sarah, cenotaph of Jacob and Leah. You can see that Jacob and Leah have Jewish people at them. You can see men are separated from women because they're Orthodox. That's what Orthodox means, separation. And so here we have the place where the patriarchs are buried. Who's not buried there is Rachel, because she died near Bethlehem on the way, remember? So her tomb is just outside of it's in Bethlehem. Today it's on the Jerusalem side of the wall, so the Jewish people can go and remember that. So here they provided a place when it was built where you can actually look down into the tomb, into the caves. It was a double cave, that's what Machpelah means. You can look down and see that, very interesting to go there. Now, there inside there are Jewish synagogues and Muslim mosques, and throughout time they've pretty well gotten along together quite well, but there have been some hiccups. And so today it has the strictest security of any place in the land, and you can kind of see it was very, very difficult to get in. They actually separate Jewish people and non-Jewish people. You can't go into the areas of Jacob because on February the 25th, 1994, Barak Goldstein, an American physician from New York who had immigrated to Israel, part of a radical party, came in, opened fire on the Muslim worshipers, killing 30 and wounding 125. And there you can see where the bullets had ricocheted off the marble columns. Well, Abraham settled in the Negev, which means south, the dry area. at Beersheba. The ruins of this Tel Beersheba, do not actually date to Abraham's day, but it lets us see what Abraham would have been like. And so it would be very well, this well that is there is very similar to the well that Abraham and Isaac would dig, and very, very interesting. The Bible actually says that Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And here's a tamarisk tree right to the left of it the Israelis have planted there beside the well at Beersheba. Very interesting. So I wanted to go down and explore the area because this is where Abraham was. This is where Abraham and Sarah were living. Abraham left that very advanced city of Ur. We'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday night. Ur and ancient Babylon and ancient Iraq. And he left that and became a shepherd, living as a Bedouin, traveling around, living in tents. He changed positions. Very interesting. Now this Tel, as I said, it comes more after the time of Abraham. On 1989, my son, who was 10, was with me, and we actually camped at the Tel one night. We kind of slept at the Tel. I was up before sunrise because I wanted to go out and explore the lifestyle of the Abraham and what he was doing. And I went down to the Wadi, and it was interesting seeing all these camels going by, these herds of camels and these sheep. And I came down to a watering hole. And in the watering hole was a family, and the family were doing their business of washing their sheep before shearing. And you can kind of see that the girls are trying to get the sheep down to the edge. That was kind of interesting to see. And then the boys are pulling them into the water, and then the father and the older brothers are actually in the water. I thought about the story of Jacob. They were all shepherds. Kind of amazing that they were just shepherds, just like this. They're trying to pull them into the water, and then they're washing, getting all the mud out and all of that. And then the animals are so soggy that they can barely get out of the water when it was time to leave. I came back and found that my son had gotten up on his own and also wandered down into the wadi, made friends with a little Bedouin boy. The Bedouin boy let him ride a camel, and then the Bedouin boy got on a camel, and they were riding together. So they couldn't speak the language, same language, or could they? Yes. Well, anyway, Beersheba is a very interesting place, and Tel Beersheba is one of my favorite places to go because it lets us see the story of Abraham. Now, last night, Monday night, Sunday night, we talked about the Newsy tablets a little bit. Abram was married to his half-sister, Sarai, and they didn't have any children. Remember I mentioned the Newsy tablets. They found one that said that if a barren wife doesn't have children, she has rights to do something about it. And so they actually followed the letter of the law, and so Sarah chose a surrogate to raise a child for their family. What was the surrogate's name? Hagar. Hagar means flight or runaway because she would run away a little bit later in our story. Where did they get this girl Hagar from? Where was she from? Egypt. She was one of the attendants that Pharaoh gave when he paid a dowry for Sarai, okay? Right? He paid a dowry for Sarai. So Hagar gets pregnant and bears a child. And the child's name would be Ishmael. Do you see L on the end? That's God, Ishmael. You know what it means? God hears. So she's very sad because when she has a child, it's kind of difficult because now Sarah's a little waffling about this because now the young woman has a child and I don't have a child and she's a little uncertain about it. And so she runs away. She runs away. And then she comes back, and then 14 years later, Sarah has a son named Isaac. Remember that? And this time, she's forced out. Sarah says, get rid of it. By the way, when we look at the Hammurabi Code from Babylon, we find out that this was the custom of Mesopotamia. She had the right to do that, so they were following those rights. 14 years later, she's forced out. She and her son wandered back. Abraham gives them a little bit of water, hoping they'll probably go down and Sarah will change her mind, they'll come back and everything will be okay. But it doesn't happen that way. So remember, she puts her son under a bush, a tree. Remember that? Yeah, kind of a interesting looking tree, right? It's, they don't have big trees there. And while she's there, she gives God a new name. She's the only person in the Bible to give God a name recorded in the Bible. Significant? She said, you are the God who sees me, she said. I have now seen the one who sees me. God appears to her, sees her in her plight. She's crying. She thinks life is over. They're going to die there in the desert. And God speaks to her and reveals himself to her. And she said, you are the God who sees me. So she calls him this. You see it on the screen? El God Roy, the God who sees. Wow. Even in this story, we see an incredible grace of God, don't we? The God who sees me. God assures her that her son will be a very powerful man. He'll be the father of 12 nations. And indeed, he's the father of the Arab tribes today that inhabit that part of the world. Isaac, the son of Sarah and Abraham, has 2 sons. Jacob had 12 sons. Jews do not descend from all of them. Who do they descend from? Judah, very good, and the kingdom of Judah. So they descend from Judah and Benjamin, right? The others were Israelites. Then we talked about on Sunday night, Petra, and we mentioned that they were from the Edomites, the children of Esau. So what I'm trying to tell you is that these people are all interrelated. There's one more interrelation we should just mention briefly. Abraham's nephew Lot were they sons or grandsons? Both, right? Lot had Ammon and Moab. And today we see the major city of, second major city of the kingdom of Jordan today is Madaba, a corruption of Moab, and the kingdoms of Ammon. So what I'm trying to tell you is all these people are related together. Now, the children of Isaac, or I should say Isaac and Ishmael, came together to bury their father. They seemed to get along quite well. The people came down and attacked Lot from Mesopotamia. Lot chased them up to a place called Laish. Today it's called Dan. He attacked them and defeated the people with his soldiers. He took Lot back, and he stopped in a place called Salem and paid tithe to a king named Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the priest king of Salem. So this is kind of one of the first times we read about Salem. Very important. Well, why would he do that? Very interesting. And then Abram was told to take his only son, his Yaqub son, and offer him on Mount Moriah. And Mount Moriah, according to the Hebrew scriptures, is Jerusalem. And so this makes Jerusalem this very, very special place for everyone who traces their roots back to Father Abraham. Now, when Joshua came to the land, they conquered the city of Jerusalem, and here's the old walls of the Jebusite city here. They conquered the walls of Jerusalem, but they didn't occupy it. So you know what happened? Like we talked about on Sunday night, and you go back and you live in the same place again. So the Jebusites went back and were living there. David decides he wants to move the capital to Jerusalem and try and unify the country after he becomes king, but he can't get into Jerusalem because the Jebusites are there. So this is a very interesting thing as the Jebusites are up on the walls. And notice what they say, you will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off. And so how would they get into the city? So they study the situation and they find a weakness. And the Bible tells us about this weakness. And we'll see it on their screen. On that day, David said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. Well, what's going on with that? Well, there was no water inside the city. So they had a shaft, and I'm going to show you a picture of it in a moment. It was leading out to a place where they could drop a rope with a bucket or a wineskin or down into the water down below. So here is that shaft. We can kind of see that shaft. It's been cleared today. It's called Warren's Shaft. You can kind of see me walking down it. Now here, I'm going to give you a picture of Jerusalem. Now here we can kind of see the temple way up there, but the other area I've highlighted in red, that's the city of David. Okay? It's not even in the modern walls of Jerusalem. It was down on this spur of the hill because here is where the spring was. So there was no water source up higher, so they had to be down by the spring so they could have life. Does that make sense? Right. So it's a little tiny spur. 100, 200 people, time of David. Now, David will ultimately build his palace up at the top of that hill. By the way, if you're way up here on the top of the hill, what would you be doing? Having a view of everybody down below you. And women, what would you might do if it was really cold and you're taking a bath? Trying to get some sunshine, maybe? You understand what's going on? You see how it all was working with the geography of what's going on. He was looking down and saw Bathsheba. Yes. So, the Gihon Spring is outside, but it's outside the walls. So what was going on is they had a place, they could go down that tunnel, that shaft I was telling you about. They could get to this area here and they could drop their bucket down into the water, but it made a vulnerability. So David says, hey, if we're going to get into there, we got to get in through this shaft, right? That's the one weakness of it because it's a walled city. How are you going to do it? Can't do it. So that's how they actually climbed up. Joab climbed up and opened the city. David conquers the city, and it becomes the capital for Israel at that point. Well, the Assyrians are coming during Hezekiah's day. Now, the Assyrians are from a place near Mosul today, right? And they're coming, and they worship a god named Asher. We're going to talk about Asher on Thursday night when we look at our ancient Iraq. And Asher is the god of war. They worship war. And they're coming, and they're really bad guys. They get the leaders, you know what they do? They skin them alive and hang their skin on the post outside. They impale them. You know what impaling is? That's kind of bad, you know. They put you on a post and leave you there, have the birds come. The Assyrians are coming. They're the bad guys. They know they've got a weakness in the city. The weakness is that water shaft. What are we going to do? You know what they do? They cut a tunnel. They cut a tunnel. It's called Hezekiah's tunnel. I'm walking through it. They cut a tunnel to bring the water from outside the city, underneath the rock, and let it drain into the city, and then they can kind of close up everything outside, and they won't know where the water is. And so as you go through Hezekiah's tunnel, it's very interesting. You can actually see the pick marks that they're using picks. It's actually kind of cool as you're going through. I always try and find this spot because you can see the picks going one direction, and then the other people are coming the other direction because who's coming? The Assyrians. They're not coming to have tea with you and have lunch. They're coming to kill you and take your place, right? And so you can actually see that. Now, very interesting. At the end of the tunnel, they actually found a plaque. They found a plaque that commemorated how this was built. The Bible tells us about this, but they find this plaque today. It's in the Istanbul Museum. There's a copy in the Israel Museum, and the plaque actually tells how this tunnel was built at the time. Is that kind of cool? Let's see if we can read it. I got it here on the screen for you. When the tunnel was driven through, while we were still axe each man toward his fellow. They're coming from two different directions, right? While there were still 3 cubits to be cut through, cubits about 1.5 feet, so 3 cubits would be 5.5 feet, right? There's still 5.5 feet to go. There was heard the voice of a man calling to his fellow, for there was an overlap on the rock on the right and the left. They missed each other by about 5 feet, but they can hear each other, right? Kind of exciting because the Assyrians are coming, right? They're the bad guys, right? And when the tunnel was driven through, the quarrymen hewed the rock, each man toward his fellow, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring toward the reservoir for 1,200 cubits, 1,800 feet. What? And the height of the rock above the heads of the quarrymen was 100 cubits, 150 feet. So they're 150 feet under the ground, building this tunnel. They miss each other by 5 feet. They connect the tunnel, and lo and behold, the water flows right in, and they're able to close it outside. So the Assyrians cannot get into the city through that weakness that Joab had exploited in the time of King David. It came out into what's called the Pool of Siloam, and here's the Pool of Siloam, not very nice. You can kind of see all these kids are enjoying it. And you might remember that there's a story from the time of Jesus. Jesus told a blind guy to do what? Go down and wash your eyes in the Pool of Siloam, right? So I'm having my 10-year-old son on that trip wash his eyes. He's now 46 years old, but anyway, that was a long time ago. And but what had happened is they had built a Crusader church here. So you only see a little piece of it. Now, they've actually excavated more of the area. Now we can actually see the Pool of Siloam. And here's an artist's representation of what we think the Pool of Siloam was actually like. A huge, huge, huge pool. A monumental pool down at the bottom of Jerusalem. And so they brought the water inside the city. Hezekiah also built a broad wall. He expanded the city because now refugees are flooding in from all over the world, all over the country. They're coming from all these cities because the Assyrians are conquering town after town. They're flowing in, and you can see this broad wall as he expands the city of Jerusalem. They've developed new water sources from new technology of plastering for cisterns and so on. You kind of know, we talked about on Sunday night how when somebody comes and knocks down your city, you kind of fill in the low places and build on top of it. This is in the Jewish quarter, and they actually cut a little thing where you can actually look down about 40 feet down to where bedrock is. So they filled 40 feet of debris at that point in time for the city rising from all of the different conquers and knocking down the walls through time. We also talked about ostraca the other night and how that sometimes they would use them in courts, but they would also, when staples had been run out and there was no more paper, they'd use them to write. So here's one very interesting. They found it in a place called Lachish, and it says, "And may my Lord know that we are watching for the signal fires of Lachish according to the signs which my Lord arranged. We can no longer see the signals of Azekah." So here they're looking for a signal from Lachish, and they can't see the signal coming anymore from Azekah because the Assyrians have conquered it. They come and they will conquer Lachish as well, or Lachish as well. Here's going to be a picture of what they would do. They actually built siege engines. They were very interesting. They used Jewish captives to put those siege engines up against the wall. The Jews didn't want to kill their own brothers, so they didn't kill them, and the whole city collapses and falls. But they then came to Jerusalem, and they couldn't conquer Jerusalem because not only did Hezekiah build that wall and build that tunnel we looked at, he prayed with Isaiah the prophet. There was a revival in Jerusalem. He believed in faith and work, you might say, right? He was working, praying, a revival. God protected them. The Assyrian king Sennacherib goes back and he writes on his prism that Hezekiah the Jew was shut up like a bird in his royal cage, but it's sour grapes because they could not conquer the city of Jerusalem. Right? Kind of cool. But about 100 years later, a guy comes from, he's tied into this statue, by the way. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. Comes from Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom, and he attacks Jerusalem, and Jerusalem falls. Now, it's no longer open, but one of my early trips to Jerusalem, I came to this Israelite tower, and they'd actually made this representation of a Babylonian siege engine plowing into that tower, and I took this picture, which was very unusual, never seen anywhere else, of the ashes from the war with the Babylonians and the spearheads that they found expended in the war when Jerusalem fell in 586 BC and was destroyed. Now today it's no longer open for whatever reason. They've done other things in that area, but very, very poignant because it happened. Now the Persians allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem in 515 BC. They were very kind. Cyrus the Persian and others allowed them to return. And then there's another guy that comes by. His name is Alexander the Great, and he respects the Jewish people and allows them to continue on. But one of his descendants has a different idea. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes, and Antiochus wants everybody in his kingdom to worship one god, Olympian Zeus. So he sends down to Jerusalem some emissaries, and the emissaries come down and they talk to the priests, and they say, hey, we want you to sacrifice to Olympian Zeus, and you got to sacrifice a pig. Now, if you know anything about Judaism, pig's unclean. We want you to sacrifice a pig on the altar in Jerusalem. So they go to a guy named Matthias. Matthias says, I'm not going to do this. And this other Jewish priest says, I'll do it. You know what Matthias does? Takes his sword and ooh, right? He kills the emissary, kills the other priest, gets his boys, runs into the wilderness, and he starts a war of rebellion. And his son starts hammering away. His name is Judas Maccabee. Maccabee means hammer, see? Right? And so ultimately, after a period of time, they become liberated. Herod the Great You might recall on Sunday night I told you Herod's father was an Edomite. And where was Herod's mother from? Petra. She's a Nabatean princess from Petra. He was appointed as king of the Jews, even though he's not truly Jewish, by the Roman Senate. And Herod built all the fabulous things of Jerusalem that we look back to today. He was probably the greatest builder of all time, one of the greatest builders of all time. He couldn't really expand the size of the temple, but he could cover it with marble and gold. And so he beautified it so very much. Now, the rabbis didn't like Herod because he wasn't really Jewish. His father had been forced to convert to Judaism, so they said it doesn't really count. But the rabbis had to say this: he who has not set eyes upon the structure of Herod has not seen a structure of beauty in all of his life. They had to confess that this was the most wonderful of all the buildings that they'd ever seen. That beautiful marble and gold, fantastic. Now, he couldn't change the size of the temple building, but he could change the size of the platform. Now, remember we looked at that ridge earlier in that picture? I said there's that little tiny ridge, and we looked up at the top, and it was still a little tiny ridge. There's a rock coming down. So the temple before had been the size of that rock. So if you're going to expand it, what do you have to do? You have to build structural walls that go out. He makes it the largest man-made gathering place on earth, larger than the Esplanade of Athens at the Acropolis. Over 12 soccer fields with the bleachers can stand inside of it. And he does that by building all these walls. So let me bring this picture up here. And here we can kind of see Herodian walls. And Herod always does this little ashlar mark, about a 3.5-inch chisel mark. Look at the size of this, it's about 33, 36 feet long that I'm walking by. See the little ashlar down? They actually have now dug down. Now that's not all the way to the bottom, they're even bigger when you go down about 30 feet below where I'm at. Here's the corner, this is going to be the southwestern corner of the temple. And it's going up, so you have these big stones back and forth. Now Jesus in his day would have gone up the steps that I'm walking up right here, and he had gone into the triple gate. And the triple gate would have come out here in the courtyard of the Gentiles, and that's how Jesus would have gone to the temple. They found, here's a model of this. You can kind of see there's two stoas coming out. There's two platforms, two bridges coming out, right? Because there's a valley coming down. It's called the Trippian Valley or the Tyropian Valley as it comes down. And here we can actually see the stubs of those stoas. It's called Wilson and Robinson's Arches. Now, the one I just had a moment ago, there's a picture there whenever you're in Jerusalem. It's very interesting. You can see men sitting on the ground there. So the ground used to be that high, right? So now the Israelis have actually excavated most of this. And the reason it was that high was because of this Trippian Valley coming down beside the Temple Mount. Now, here we can kind of see a priestly house, a chief priest's house that they had, that they could overlook the city of Jerusalem. And you can see the beautiful things that they would have in the house. You see that nice rug that they have, that nice mosaic floor. And here you can kind of see a candlestick. Very interesting because it's very different than the candlestick of Titus. But this is a chief priest, one of the family, the high priest that had this house, so probably more accurate than what Titus would have done at his place in Rome. Here we can kind of see the Temple Mount, and look what's next to the Temple Mount. It's called the Tower of Antonia, named after Mark Antony. So they built a Roman fortress next to that. And of course, in the story of Paul, there's a riot in the temple, and the commander goes down from the Tower of Antonia, rescues Paul, brings him in. Remember the story? This is the strongest fortification on earth. The strongest fortification on earth. And so here we have the Tower of Antonia right next to it. And it's because it's surrounded by valleys. Here's this Trippian Valley coming down to the Pool of Siloam, right? You can see they had a major road. It's called the Cardo. You got a cardioid, right? Artery, right? Cardo going north and south. Main road going down, went all the way down. They actually had two Cardos in Jerusalem. So here we can actually see the Kidron Valley. Kidron Valley is going to be on the east side of the walls of Jerusalem. You're looking up to the east, to the walls to the west, but we're on the east wall here and looking across. Here we see another valley called the Hinnom Valley. Remember what was the Hinnom Valley? What do we call it today? Hell. Gehenna, remember we talked about it earlier? So there's 3 valleys. Hinnom Valley, Trippian Valley, Kidron Valley, right? That's what dissects or trisects Jerusalem. Now this is interesting with the Hinnom Valleys. It wraps around up toward the Jaffa Gate. It's actually a park. And one day I heard Bob Dylan doing a concert there in the park. And Tom Petty played right before him. Very interesting. I also saw it on fire one time. And so hell was burning again. Now down in the valley, in the Kidron Valley, we have all these olive trees. So right on the other side of the Kidron Valley, we have this Church of All Nations. It's a Latin church, a Roman Catholic church. And here on the left, it has these old olive trees. They don't go back to Jesus' day, but they do probably only go back 500-600 years. But the roots go back to Jesus' day. That's the way olive trees grow. They've been cut down through the time. And here's some other churches on the Mount of Olives. So we kind of are looking over the Mount of Olives, very important. We can see a Russian church there, Church of Mary Magdalene. And then we can see this other little church. See the little church up on the right? I'll kind of focus on that. Well, first I'm going to go up to the top. There's a church that Helena had built originally when she came in the 4th century. And today it's not very important to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem, although I would just about guess that it's pretty important because we're going to look at a prophecy that Jesus gave about the destruction of Jerusalem. She built it to commemorate that prophecy that Jesus gave about Jerusalem being destroyed. Today, they call it Pater Noster, or the Lord's Prayer. They're Our Father. So it has the Lord's Prayer in 140 different languages. There's English and Greek. There's Hebrew. And I like this one because I'm part Cherokee. So there's the Cherokee language and the Moor language. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Moor language, but I got my picture by both of them. My favorite church on the Mount of Olives is right here. It's called Dominus Flevit. In Latin, the Lord wept. When you go there, it's got an incredible view of Jerusalem. You almost look straight across where the Jewish temple once stood. Now again, that's the Muslim shrine, the Dome of the Rock, but it looks almost, well, I'm taking that picture looking straight across. You can see many of the churches off in the distance. They're very important, but they've actually built that spot there. But I want you to focus on this, the Lord wept. Can you see what that is? It's a teardrop. Now what's on the sides? Tear bottles. Here I have a Roman glass tear bottle. The ancients would collect their tears in a bottle. In their times of extreme emotion, they would pour out a lifetime of sorrow. Mary does not have an onion under the table, crying to wash Jesus' feet with her tears. She's pouring out a lifetime of sorrow. Follow me? And here you can actually see when they built this, just a splendid, probably my favorite church in Jerusalem, they actually have tear bottles on the side. I also call it the chicken church because inside on the altar they have this depiction of a chicken. Well, why would that be? Well, here's the text. It's in Latin, but I don't read Latin. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling. Look, your house is left to you desolate. Jesus had left the temple for the last time. Always before he said, my Father's house, my Father's house. What does he call it here? Your house. He had removed his presence from the temple. Now, he had told a story when he was over there in the temple, kind of an interesting story. It was by the place of trumpets. We believe they were offering baskets that were actually had trumpets on them. Maybe they would have people to blow shofars. You'd have a job back there, Jeff, to blow shofars whenever somebody was getting a big offering. And remember the story? A widow came. She came in and was probably very embarrassed because she only had 2 leptons. Lepton means thin one because they were the thinnest coins available. What do we call them? Mites. 128 of these in one day's wage. Right? 1/64 of one day's wage. And she throws them in. And Jesus said, guys, she's given more than everybody else. Now here on my table, I've got some, what they would call a penny. It's actually a denarius, silver, one day's wage. I've got a half shekel, 2 days' wage. I've got a shekel, 4 days' wage. If I was wealthier, I'd have a gold shekel up here, but I don't have one of those. I got pictures of them from my friend Badoon in Jerusalem. And the disciples have a really hard time. They said, man, you're a good teacher, but you don't have any idea about finance. How could you run it? So they walk out and they say, teacher, what massive stones. What magnificent buildings. Right? It takes more than 2 mites to run this place, Jesus. You know, they're kind of just griping and complaining as they walk across, because it follows that story. They go across the valley to that little spot, and that's when he says, how often I would gather you together, but you would not. And he blows their minds as they get on the other side. They're looking back straight across. You saw the picture, straight across. And he says, the time is coming when they will not leave one stone upon another. It blows the minds of the disciples. What? This is the strongest fortification on earth. You have these incredible valleys with the walls. Then you have these stone building coming up that is so thick. How could it ever fall? You have a fortress on it. Impossible. Jesus goes on. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea go flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. He gives a sign. You'll see Jerusalem what? Surrounded by armies. When it happens, take off. Go now. Depart. What happened? The zealots, the Jewish zealots, attacked Masada in AD 66. Fascinating story. I can't get into all the details with you, but it's absolutely fascinating. And Menachem comes down. He attacks the city, the fortress. He kills the Roman soldiers, steals their weapons, marches into Jerusalem as the Messiah. But he's a rascal. Orgies. I mean, he's just not a good guy at all. And so the Romans then say, we don't like this very much, right? And so Cestius Gallus, the legate of Syria, responds, comes down from Antioch in Syria, surrounds Jerusalem. They get into a big fight. And then for some reason, some crazy reason, Cestius Gallus leaves. So what do you think the zealots are saying inside? God's for us. He's giving us a victory. He's gone. They open the gates. They chase after them. Jesus had given a sign. What was the sign? You see them surround. Leave. Now the gates are open. They flee. Not one believer in Jesus perished in Jerusalem. They fled, went across the Jordan Valley to a place called Pella, and they were safe. And then Vespasian and Titus returned with the 10th Legion of Rome. They surround the city. They besiege the city. They destroy the city. Titus, however, said, don't destroy the temple. It's the most beautiful building on earth. Don't destroy it. But the zealots kept fighting, and the zealots actually went into the temple. Now, in the temple is stored all kinds of pure olive oil, right? And there's all kind of gold. The zealots are inside the temple, and they're fighting from there because they believe God will give them victory. Finally, a Roman soldier shoots a firebrand in, catches the olive oil on fire, catches the cedar on fire, the cedars of Lebanon. It all burns, the gold melts and goes down, and then they come in and take the whole place apart and kill everybody in there, right? So what do? They're looking for the gold, and they push the stones off the platform. Now that wall is a structural wall. Remember I told you Herod doubled the size? If that rock is like that and you double the size, you've got to now put structural walls out here to hold it up. I'm going to show you some pictures from underneath in just a moment. Put these structural walls out like that, doubles the size, so that it's hollow on the other side of that wall. Get the point? So on the top, they push all of the building off. It falls down 70, 80, 90, 100 feet. crashes into the Cardo here. Can you see the Cardo's all busted? The Cardo's not on solid ground either. There's sewers underneath it. See all the stones are broken? Right? And here you can actually see the stones. Now they took the good stones later on and they recycled them into other buildings, but these are not good stones, and these not good stones were left there, and they were covered up by the debris for almost 2,000 years, 1,900 years. Right? And when you look closely at these stones, I never cease to marvel when I'm there. You can actually go over and look at them and you see the fire marks on them. Josephus said the fire was so hot that the water in the limestone boiled and they exploded and cracked apart. And so you can actually walk in there and touch the fulfilled prophecy. So here at the western wall where they're worshiping, on the other side it's open, because they had built structural walls to go up and hold the platform. As a matter of fact, I had the privilege of going down underneath with our camera crew several years ago and shooting these pictures. It used to be, it's called Solomon Stables or Suleiman Stables, but anyway, you can actually see here the pillars holding up the arches, the Roman arches, where they had actually expanded the size of the temple, right? And here you can see, what do you see on that? Very interesting. See that little ashlar? What does that tell you? Who made it? Herod. It's got his little signature mark on it, right? This is all built by Herod. There's another fascinating place I want to just show you very briefly called the Burnt House. This is a priestly workshop, Cathros, destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. And they found all these things inside. You can see that they're not pottery for bowls here and for cups. They're out of stone, so you don't have to replace them every year at Passover. They're durable year after year. And here's a spear they found inside of it. This place was actually burned, and the ashes there from AD 70 on that destruction. Well, Titus returned to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Rome with the booty of the Jewish temple. He got all that gold and went back, and he builds this arch called Titus's Arch. Some of you have probably seen it there in the Forum. But if you look closely inside the Forum, what do you find? A menorah, the golden menorah. And you know what Titus did with that money? He built a big building, a big arena called the Colosseum, because it was next to a colossal statue of Nero in Rome. And so the Colosseum was actually built by booty from the war with the Jews and the Jewish temple. Well, 62 years later, the Jews are wanting to rebuild their temple, and they have a guy who is anointed as Messiah. His name is Simon Bar Kokhba, and he's now named Simon Bar Kokhba. Bar is son, Kokhba is a star. He's Simon Bar Kokhba, the son that will ride out of the star. Remember, a star will rise out of Jacob? And so he's anointed as Messiah by Rabbi Akiva, who invents modern Judaism. I have a coin here on the table. It's actually a Bar Kokhba coin. It's my most precious coin on the table, by the way. It was minted during this 3-year period that he actually leads this rebellion. And here you can see some gold denarii and some other kind of denarii, but this very important coin. This coin is a little different than my coin. This is actually a silver coin, and you can see it has a temple on it because they wanted to rebuild the temple, right? And so it's called the Freedom of Israel. And so people joined. And by the way, believers in Jesus in Jerusalem were part of the Jews. And so they come to the believers in Jesus, say, come fight with us. We have our Messiah, Bar Kokhba. They say, we have our Messiah named Jesus, the Nazarene. This is a separation between Jews and believers in Jesus, Christians. And so this guy named Hadrian responds, and he comes down and besieges Jerusalem and has no mercy. This time he doesn't just destroy Jerusalem, he scrapes it down to bedrock. So when you walk on the old streets of Jerusalem on those big stones, they don't go to the time of Jesus, they go to the time of Hadrian. And he rebuilds the city. Now it's interesting, Bar Kokhba died with a sword in his hand fighting, called Messiah by the Jewish people. Jesus died saying, my kingdom is not of this world. What a contrast. Well, Hadrian builds the Aelia Capitolina, the new capital of Rome, named it after his family, Aelia. And he built a temple to Jupiter on the place of the Jewish temple to desecrate it. He barred Jews or banned Jews, said you can't come to Jerusalem or we're going to kill you. You'd be executed immediately. Well, who else couldn't come to Jerusalem? Believers in Jesus. They were looked upon as Jewish, right? Very, very interesting. The roots of this go back thousands of years, and here's the animosity that happens and separates Jewish and Christian in those early years. The Christians are trying to say, we're not Jews, right? By the way, let me just ask I don't want to ask you a little brief question. When did Jesus die? Not the year, when? In the spring? What day was it? Friday? What day of the month was it? It was the 14th day of the first Jewish month, which was Passover. Right? Then there was an annual Sabbath on the 15th. And there was an offering of the wave sheaf when they would dedicate the coming barley harvest to God on the 16th, right? Jesus dies on the 14th. Jesus dies on Passover. Early Christians were Jewish, so when they honored the crucifixion of Jesus, they honored it on the 14th. Look it up in your Google box tonight. It's called the Quartodeciman controversy. They actually honored the crucifixion of Jesus not on Friday, but on the 14th day of the first Jewish month. So when the Romans are back here, they're seeing Jewish honoring Passover on the 14th, and they're seeing believers in Jesus honoring the crucifixion of Jesus on the 14th, and from their perspective, they're all one and the same people, right? So it becomes an effort to separate the honoring of the crucifixion from Passover. So it's very interesting. Ultimately they choose a day called the Festival of Ishtar. First Sunday after the full moon, after the spring equinox. And we've anglicized it to Easter. And if you watch carefully, Passover and Easter never really coincide, or rarely would ever coincide, because they're trying to say we're not Jewish. So there's anti-Semitism that really drives a wedge here. Very interesting. Sorry I got off of that, a little tangent there. But anyway, Jews are banned, they can't come, so they come near Jerusalem, they see it off in the distance, they cry, they weep, and they let them come one day a year on that day to remember the destruction of their temple, right? As we talked about earlier. Well, Helena, the mother of Constantine, she comes in the 4th century, and she searches out the holy places, and she builds this fabulous church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now there's 2 domes. Can you see the 2 domes? This little dome here is over Calvary. This big dome is over the tomb of Jesus, right? Now, remember I told you that Hadrian built a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount? He built a temple to Aphrodite on the place of Calvary. And that's why they chose to build the building there. Even though it's inside the walls at that time, the walls had changed and all of that. This is 4th century. So that actually goes back to that time and where Hadrian had desecrated the spot where the believers in Jesus were honoring his death. Well, the next significant event happens in 614. The Persians, the Iranians, they come, the Zoroastrians, they butcher the Christians. They decimate Jerusalem. 15 years later, the Christians reconstitute enough to retake the city, but they've been just totally devastated. And 8 years after that, the Muslim Arabs are at the gate, and the Christians are just so desecrated inside they cannot really resist them. And we now have what's called a jihad, or struggle, and they capture the city of Jerusalem. And this begins this long battle back and forth of who will control the city of Jerusalem. Now, when the Muslims came, there was a domed building built by Helena, and it was over a holy rock, right? The holy rock, 2 holy rocks, really. It's kind of almost the same rock, you could say. The rock where Jesus died, and then the rock where he was buried in the tomb and came back to life. So they had this fabulous structure with this dome rock. They're impressed by that. But they don't want their people to go in there, so you know what they do? They create a counterfeit idea. Here we go. They go to the place where the Jewish temple had been, where that temple of Hadrian, Jupiter had been, where the Temple Mount had stood, and they called that a holy rock. And they invented an idea that Muhammad came there at night in a vision, in a dream, and went to heaven from there. So it's called the Dome of the Rock. And so it becomes the holiest place in the Muslim world, saying that he went, and gorgeous, look at all this Persian tiles and so on, just spectacular building. But it's built over the idea that Muhammad came in a dream to that place. He also went to Bethlehem and to Mount Sinai, by the way, but that's a different story. Here you can kind of see, it originally was gold, then they took the gold off, and now they put the gold back on, and all these Persian tiles, and it is a fantastic, fabulous building to see. And so they built that building. Well, things went along somewhat okay for a while, until this mentally imbalanced Muslim ruler named Hakim destroys the holy places. He chops down the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1009 AD. He destroys the holy places. They start raping all the Christian women. They start making Christian men wear horseshoes. Clonk, clonk, clonk. Can you imagine? Chewing them, yeah. Nails through their feet. This launches the Crusades. Now, there's a lot of bad stuff about the Crusades. A lot of it's not accurate. The Crusades are actually a response to this atrocity that had happened in Jerusalem. We often hear it's just about trying to get new money and new kingdoms, and people lost fortunes going to try and restore that. And so the Christians retake Jerusalem for a period of time until Salah ad-Din recaptures the city in 1187, and then it becomes Muslim once again. The current walls were built in the 16th century by Suleiman the Magnificent, right? So the current walls really don't go back to the time of Jesus. Although the bases of many of them would go back to that time. It's called Al-Quds by the Muslims, which means the Holy One. Here we can kind of see underneath the dome. You're not allowed to go in there unless you're Muslim today. I've had the privilege of going in many times, but it's very difficult to go in because people go in who have apocalyptic, messianic syndromes where they try and think they can start the end of the world war with Armageddon. So there are a lot of bad things that have happened. Here we can kind of see off in the distance. We can see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Inside is the Chapel of Calvary. It's not Roman Catholic, that is Orthodox. So you have icons instead of statues. Here you can actually reach down. If you look on the left side through the glass, and on the right side you can actually see a rock, right? That was the rock where the belief was that was where Calvary was. Where the man is kneeling here, you can actually reach down and feel into the rock if you're into such things. I try and encourage people to actually feel that. So it's holy rock for the Christians. It's a holy rock for Jewish people. On top of that mountain, that temple, that wall is where their temple had stood, so they come. It's the holiest place in the world for them to go. And so I just want you to see this is why the three monotheistic religions come to Jerusalem. Here you can kind of see into Calvary again. Jesus goes out and prays in that Garden of Gethsemane we talked about, or the Garden of the Oil Press. He's praying. He's arrested there. He's taken up. Now, these are actual stairs from the 2nd century BC. Jesus would have been taken up these stairs to be tried at the palace of Caiaphas. Here, my 10-year-old son is standing in what's the courtyard of a beautiful church, a Latin church called St. Peter in Gallicantu, the cock crowing, and that's where we believe the courtyard would have been. I just tell people say, is it really that one? People go to Jerusalem and they say, man, I got there and there's a church there. Can't believe it. So thank God there was a church. There wasn't a church, there'd be a house, there'd be a mall, there'd be an apartment building, right? But at least the church preserves the memory of the story. So we can go there and talk about the story. Thank God there's a church there, right? This church, and then they say, was it really this one? I often say, hey, if it wasn't this pew, it was this one. There's one of these right in here, and they preserve this one. So I like to go there so I can think about the story, right? Does it make sense? Yeah. So to me, it's not that there's a holy place there, but the story is holy, right? The story is holy. Well, Jesus was arrested, dragged up that, sent over to Herod, sent to Pilate. Pilate washes his hands and says, I find no fault in the man. Jesus sent out bearing his cross and goes to Calvary. By the way, the Via Dolorosa is definitely not the correct route of what had happened, but the Franciscans did that because they were kind of all inside the city. It was safer to be inside the city, but we know it's not really the way it would have been. But they all end up here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And again, it's very moving for me to be there and go and think about the story inside of that. Very, very different. It's monitored by 6 different religions: Orthodox, Armenian, Roman Catholic, Ethiopian, Syrian Orthodox, and by the Egyptian Coptic. This is the tomb of Jesus. Now, the outside of the tomb was chopped down by Hakim, so this has been rebuilt by the Russians. It was donated by Russia to rebuild that in marble. But inside the tomb is actually the place that we believe Jesus would have been laid to rest. You can see that beautiful marble cover. It's got a big crack in it because they cracked it so they wouldn't take it and use it in some palace or other building, right? So it has a crack in it, and very unusual to be there. And then here we can kind of see there's a very interesting ceremony they have called Holy Saturday, where the whole place lights up. Now, this is an interesting custom. Saladin captured the city, and he said that we're going to guarantee the rights of Christians to their holy places. So every night there's a ceremony done by this man. It had been done by his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, all the way back to Saladin. Very interesting. They've given him a ladder. He crawls up the ladder and locks the door at night. He crawls down the ladder, and look what he does. Gives the ladder back to the Christians inside, and they're locked inside the tomb, inside the church. Very interesting. Every night, that ritual is repeated over and over again, saying we're giving you the rights to be here. So here you can kind of just see inside the church, see the stone of unction. That's kind of changed out by whoever is in charge of it. Again, I don't look at the rocks being holy. The story is holy. Here's the tomb of Jesus again. And ultimately, people say, was it really here? Well, it's interesting that even Muslims come to honor this. People go and say, was this really that? Well, I'm very skeptical. So I can still remember one of my first times there talking to someone, and they said, well, come, let's go back and we look. And we go into the Syrian chapel. You see this? These are first century graves. So what do we know? This is a first century burial site, right? It's right behind the tomb of Jesus. On the backside of the tomb of Jesus is actually a Coptic shrine, and then there's a Syrian chapel, and it's in the Syrian chapel. So I always like to take people back to see that because it's a first century tomb. Now, most Protestants like to go to this place. It's called the Garden Tomb because there's flowers blooming and birds singing and belching buses right below. But anyway, we don't worry about that part. But they like to go there because it's more visual to them. And there was a guy named Charles Warren, the same with that shaft, and he actually looked at Charles Gordon, I should say, I'm sorry, not Warren. And he was staying at the Damascus gate, and he looked across, and what does he see? What do you see there? You see the 2 sockets? He saw what he thought was a skull. That must be Golgotha, the place of the skull, right? And so he went over and he found a tomb there. And so it's pretty exciting. So a lot of Protestants especially like to go, and they like to go to that place. But ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter, is it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or is it the Garden Tomb? What really matters is what the door at the Garden Tomb says. It says, he is not here, for he is risen, right? Again, the story is holy, right? The story. The other things just help us to imagine it. Now here's this model of Jerusalem we've been looking at. You can see that kind of holy rock, that little rock. It was a quarry, and as they were cutting through the quarry, they got to a place where there was crumbly rock, so they didn't cut it. That's where they used the high place for executions beside the garden gate called the Ginneth Gate coming out before they changed the walls of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is called the city of peace, yet few cities have been subject to more war or bloodshed. Will there be peace in Jerusalem? Well, I pray for the peace of Jerusalem every day. Hope you do too, right? That's why we should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. But I can tell you this, the last book of the Bible, Revelation, says something very interesting. It says, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there'll be no more death or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Wow. Can there be peace in Jerusalem? The animosities are so hard, and it's so complicated now by everything going on. It's a real struggle. Augustine of Hippo, an early 4th century church father, wrote a book called The City of God. And he said, the church reigning over the earth is the New Jerusalem, right? Is this really the New Jerusalem? We look back and we see Babylonian spearheads, Roman armies, and they come to the conclusion that the only way for peace in Jerusalem is through Jesus. Jesus died for all the people of Jerusalem. He died for all the people of the world. And that's the hope that we have. That's why there can only be peace when we have Jesus in our lives. When people accept Jesus, they can forgive their enemies and come together to be as one. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, thank you tonight for this opportunity to drift away to a faraway time and place, find ourselves in Jerusalem, going down through the centuries, looking at these places. We're amazed to see what has happened. All the stories that have happened there, rooted in Scripture, holy stories. We thank you, Jesus, for coming into the world and living your life there and walking all the way to Calvary and giving your life. And we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray for Jewish people and Christian people and Muslim people and non-believers all over the world. They'll come to accept your peace and be able to forgive one another and live in harmony. We pray for your power to be upon those people there in a special way because there's such animosity. Help them to come to find you in real peace is my prayer. Help us in our own lives and our own families to have your peace in our lives, and may it pass on to our families, to our neighbors, to people we work with, places where we worship, the things that we do. May that peace spread is my prayer in the name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. Well, tomorrow night we're going to look at the footsteps of Jesus. It's one of my favorite in the series because we go on a pictorial essay of Jesus. And then we'll look at when Iraq ruled the world, ancient Iraq, and we'll kind of tie in a little bit to this guy here on the screen because God confronted a Iraqi king. Can you believe that? Wow. And then this series will continue. You kind of met Tyler earlier this evening, and he's going to continue on and talking on this weekend some really great things. So hope you can join him for that as well. Well, come, Pastor. I think we got some business to do tonight still.
Business. Hey, didn't you enjoy that? Boy, that was a blessing. It's like I was in Israel, and that was good. Pastor Tony, that was excellent presentation. I went to Israel like, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, and you added so much more detail, I can tell you. So the next time I go there, you're going to be the tour guide. That was excellent, very, very good. So we're going to do a drawing right now for the little. I got to figure out my little names. Another oil lamp, and I'd do a question and answer period. But you guys have to go to school tomorrow. We don't want you to stay out too late. Anybody have to go to school? Yeah, there's a few of you. Get up early in the morning. We have a couple truck drivers here. So, do you want?
Oh, you go ahead.
I picked it. So here we go. I need my glasses, but you read it there, Pastor Miguel. Elaine Hammond. Elaine. There you go. That's good. And you've had perfect attendance 3 times too, so that's real good. So congratulations. A little gift. So hey, there are refreshments as well. Pastor Tony.
Yeah, you have to put in glass. You can put it in glass, but it'll be fine out in the air. Yeah. Probably wouldn't burn it though.
Okay.
I mean, you can put it on we're burning it. That's a replica I'm burning up here. It burns a little bit better. The oil will discolor it. You're welcome.
Okay, very good. So, anyway, Pastor Tony, do you have any other things you would like to say before we dismiss everybody?
Yeah, I'm not doing any Israel trips because of all the problems over there, but we do have a tour of Egypt. And so if you're interested, there's some of the brochures up here. And it's next November. That's the very best time of the year to be in that part of the world. I didn't have any better sense I would go in July or August when it's hot, hot as blazes. So November is usually just the perfect time to be there. And so if you're interested, there's some of the flyers up here on the front.
Hey, very good. Thank you again. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Again, thanks for coming out. Nice job. Good stuff. Real good stuff.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
You requested clay.
We'll do it tomorrow night.
There you go.